Hey everybody, today we are going to be talking about plant taxonomy, or around here they would say plant taxonomy. Oh geez. Taxonomy. It is a way of classifying or grouping living things. So as we look at plants, we can generally group them into two different things depending on what we're looking at. So, for example, there are basically two big groups that all plants can fit into: seed-making plants and seedless plants. But what about seedless grapes? We'll get to that when we get to plant reproduction. So, seedless plants, they reproduce what's called asexually. So in other words, they can make more plants, but it only needs one plant to be involved. For example, there are some algae which are asexual. Moss are asexual, or as we like to say around here, moss. That's the one that I always got in trouble with when I lived in California. They gave me a hard time for saying moss. Mosses can be asexual. However, some plants that you don't even think about, they can also reproduce asexually. So here is a potato, and if you slice off a piece of potato, it will start to grow. You could get many different plants from one potato, and that's a form of asexual reproduction. Another is strawberries. So what strawberries do, they have these things called runners, and they go out and then they start to grow. And it's a plant that comes from one plant. So this is another way of asexual reproduction. Perhaps somebody in your household has taken a plant, thrown it into some water and let it sit for a while, and then they get some roots. And then you throw it into some soil, and then you've got a new plant. This also is another form of asexual reproduction. Now, seed plants, having a seed means that two plant parts must contribute to making a new plant. And it's often two different plants. But when we get into plant reproduction, you'll find that sometimes it's the same plant, and sometimes it's different parts on the same plant. Very confusing, but anyway, two things contribute to make a new plant. And we basically have two types of seed plants. There are something called Gymnosperms and Angiosperms. So gymno comes from the Latin for meaning naked. I wonder what that means in terms of gymnasium. And you're going to have to ask me in class because I'm not going to say it on the internet. But anyway, gymnosperms have what are called naked seeds. Sperm, now don't get all bent out of shape on this one, that also is Latin and it means seed. So literally it does mean naked seed. An example of gymnosperms would be evergreens, things that have cones, conifers. If you look at the cone, inside you'll find the seeds. So you may say, well, the cone acts as an extra thing for protection, so it's not naked. Scientists call them naked anyway, because the seed itself is just there. There's no protection or anything around it. Whereas angiosperms, they have a covered seed. They have extra layers on the outside for protection. Some examples include things like apple trees, maple trees, raspberries, corn. You think about corn, there's a big, huge glomp on the outside before you actually get to the seed on the inside. And, an apple, you've got a lot of stuff on the outside that protects those seeds. And we'll get into why would an apple go to all that trouble to make that for those two little seeds. We'll have to think about that one. There are also two groups of angiosperms. They are called monocots and dicots. The full name is monocotyledons, for those of you that want to know, and dicotyledons, but we just call them monocots and dicots. And it has to do with what's called the seed leaf. Mono means one. So if you've ever been to Disney, they have the monorail. It's got one rail. These plants, when they first sprout, they will have one seed leaf. Whereas a dicot, they have two seed leaves. What do you mean? Well, as the seed comes up, you see over here the monocot, it has just one seed leaf when it first starts to grow. A dicot will have two seed leaves. Ain't that something that somebody figured that out? Some examples of monocots include grass, corn, palm trees, lilies. Monocots are best known for having what are called parallel veins. If you look at the veins of a blade of grass, all of the veins are going the same direction. That's called parallel. Whereas with dicots, they have branching veins, and they're going in all kinds of different directions. So think of, for example, a maple tree. They have a branching vein system, so that would be a dicot. And again, dicots include most trees and things like berries and some other stuff. Then we have what I call two groups of leaf droppers. So you think about how some trees drop their leaves. You have evergreens, and then you have what are called deciduous. The leaves all fall off at one time. Do evergreens drop their leaves? Anyone who owns a pine tree or a spruce tree will tell you yes, they drop leaves all the time. They drop their needles all the time. They just don't drop them all at once like a deciduous does in the fall. However, there is actually a third group, which is called a deciduous evergreen. You know, for every rule, there's an exception to the rule. I before E, except after C, except for neighbor and way. Yeah, right. So there's an exception here. You have something called a tamarack, or they're sometimes called a larch. And they grow in swampy areas in Wisconsin. If you go up north to Eagle River or Minocqua or someplace up there and you go into the boggy areas, you'll see tamaracks growing there. They're a swampy growing tree. Okay, so make sure that you have everything filled out, and this sheet that you have filled out is going to come in very handy at some point. So, we will talk to you later.